When an empath finally chooses themselves, something remarkable happens. The world expects them to become cold, distant, selfish, but that's not what unfolds. They don't lose their compassion, they become dangerous. Not to people, but to every pattern, every system, every relationship that has survived on their endless sacrifice. Carl Jung called this transformation individuation, the birth of the true self, and in a world built on their self-erasure, it's the most threatening act they can commit. Picture the moment it begins. The empath sits alone after another day of carrying emotions that never belonged to them. They said yes when their soul screamed no. They smiled through pain, so no one else had to feel it. Their body burns with exhaustion from absorbing stress that wasn't theirs to hold. But this time, something shifts. Instead of pushing through, they pause. And in that pause, a forbidden question rises. What if I chose me? That question is more than rebellion. Jung called it the beginning of consciousness, and for the empath who dares to answer it honestly, there is no going back. Because here's the truth, no one tells their so-called gift of feeling everything is not a gift at all. It's survival sensitivity, a trauma response disguised as compassion. Jung saw this pattern again and again. He wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But how can an empath become who they are when they've never known themselves outside of other people's emotions? Let me tell you what really happens in that first awakening. It's not gradual, it's not gentle, it's what Jung called a collision with the unconscious. A shocking recognition that their entire identity has been built on a lie. The lie that they are responsible for everyone else's feelings. Jung documented this exact collapse in his work on individuation. He discovered that highly sensitive people often develop what he called inflated compassion. They become addicted to being needed, because being needed is the only way they learned to feel valuable. But when that illusion shatters, something extraordinary breaks free. The real self begins to emerge, and with it comes something most people never expect from an empath: rage. Pure, undiluted rage at being used, manipulated, and taken for granted. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." For empaths, that darkness isn't evil. It's their silenced voice, their denied needs, their suppressed anger, and when they finally meet this shadow, everything changes. They don't become cruel, they become what I call consciously selective. They begin to see what was once invisible, the tactics of manipulation, the emotional vampires, the difference between genuine need and manufactured demand. And from that moment on, the empath is no longer the world's quiet savior. They are something far more powerful, a soul that cannot be controlled. This isn't cynicism, it's clarity. Jung noticed that when highly sensitive people begin the process of individuation, the same patterns reveal themselves again and again. I call them the 8 signs of conscious awakening. And if you recognize them in yourself, it means you are experiencing what Jung described as the birth of psychological sovereignty. Sign 1. The energy reversal. For the first time, your energy stops flowing outward into everyone else's lives and begins to return home, to you. Jung observed this shift in his patients. When people stop unconsciously pouring out their life force, they suddenly find energy for themselves. You no longer leave social interactions feeling drained. You stop absorbing other people's moods. Most importantly, you stop feeling guilty for having boundaries. Jung wrote, "Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." And here's the remarkable part. Others notice this shift before you do. They sense you're no longer available as their emotional dumping ground. Some will even try to guilt you back into your old role. Sign 2. The mask falls away. Jung called this the death of the persona, the collapse of the social mask we wear to be accepted. For empaths, that mask is almost always the nice one, the helpful one, the one who never says no. But once individuation begins, that mask becomes impossible to maintain. You begin to speak your actual truth, instead of what people want to hear. You say when you're tired instead of pretending you're fine, and this terrifies the people who once benefited from your silence. Jung warned, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Yet for the awakening empath, self-acceptance becomes more important than social approval. Sign 3. The projection recall. Jung discovered that we often project our hidden qualities onto others. Empaths project their own sensitivity, their depth, their genuine care onto people who don't actually possess it. During awakening, this illusion dissolves. You stop seeing potential and start seeing reality. You stop making excuses for bad behavior. You stop pretending selfishness is just misunderstood kindness. Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." The empath realizes they were irritated by selfishness because they had suppressed their own healthy selfishness for too long. Sign 4. Boundaries become sacred. Jung described mature individuals as having individual integrity. For empaths, this means you finally listen to your inner signals instead of external demands. You start saying no without apologizing. You stop explaining yourself to people who were never listening, and you begin to recognize that those who get angry at your boundaries were the very ones exploiting your lack of them. This isn't selfishness, it's sacred selfishness. The truth that caring for yourself isn't betrayal, it's the foundation of authentic connection. Sign 5. The guilt evaporates. This one shocks most empaths. The crushing guilt for having needs, for taking up space, for disappointing others, begins to disappear. Jung called this shadow integration. When you stop rejecting parts of yourself, you stop apologizing for being human. You realize guilt was often just a leash, a manipulation tactic, and when someone says with disappointment, "You've changed," you no longer rush to reassure them. You think, "Yes, I have. That was the point." Sign 6. Authenticity over approval. Jung saw individuation as the path to self-actualization, living from your authentic core rather than external scripts. For empaths, this means honesty finally wins over people-pleasing. You stop laughing at jokes that aren't funny. You stop nodding along just to keep peace. You stop performing kindness that costs you your truth. This authenticity is magnetic to some and threatening to others, and the empath discovers what I call authentic magnetism. When you stop trying to be liked by everyone, you start attracting the right ones. Sign 7. The healer turns inward. Jung believed many healers were wounded healers, tending others to avoid their own pain. But awakening flips the script. For the first time, the empath turns their gifts inward. You ask, "What do I need?" You nurture your own inner child instead of parenting every adult around you. You stop giving from an empty cup. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are," and the empath finally gives themselves permission to discover who that is, apart from being everyone else's caretaker. Sign 8. Conscious connection. The final sign is what Jung called conscious relationship, the ability to connect without losing yourself. The empath develops what I call boundaried compassion. You feel for others without carrying their emotions. You attract people who respect your limits instead of those who exploit your kindness. Relationships shift from one-sided sacrifice to mutual respect. You love others without needing to save them. And in that moment, for the first time, you stand in relationship as your whole self. People still matter, but you no longer need their approval. You can look at them and say, "I see you, but I don't need you." Jung observed that individuation always leads to deeper, more authentic connections, because for the first time you are relating as your true self, not the mask you used to perform. But Jung didn't romanticize this process. He called it the night sea journey, a period of darkness, disorientation, and loss that is necessary for rebirth. And for empaths, it feels like death. Because in many ways it is. It is the death of the false self that was built around pleasing others. You may lose friends who only loved the version of you that served them. You may feel an ache of loneliness as you learn to sit with yourself for the first time. You may grieve relationships that were never truly rooted in love, but in your usefulness. Jung wrote, "No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell." The awakening empath must descend into their own psychological underworld before they can rise into authentic selfhood. Jung was one of the first to see the connection between psyche and body, and empaths know this in their bones. Years of carrying other people's emotions creates what I call energetic toxicity, chronic fatigue, anxiety, digestive struggles, autoimmune problems. But when empaths stop people-pleasing, their bodies begin to heal. The nervous system finally exhales. Sleep becomes deeper. Pain that lingered for years often begins to lift. Jung understood that psychological healing and physical healing are inseparable. Your body was never meant to process everyone else's emotional waste. And when you stop being the world's landfill, your health naturally begins to restore. Individuation also changes every relationship. Some bonds deepen, others dissolve. For empaths, this sorting process can feel brutal, but it is essential. I call it the great relationship purge. It is the separation between authentic connections and exploitative ones. People who truly love you will adapt to your boundaries and celebrate your growth. Those who resist were likely feeding on your self-neglect. Jung called this the difference between genuine love and neurotic attachment. You begin to see that many of your relationships were built on an unconscious contract. You provide endless emotional labor. They provide conditional acceptance. When you break that contract and claim your own life, some people will leave. Let them. Because here is what Jung discovered that changes everything. When empaths stop being emotional sponges, they don't lose their sensitivity. They develop conscious sensitivity. Conscious sensitivity is not weakness. It is a superpower. You can still feel deeply, but now you choose what to absorb and what to release. You can read people with clarity without drowning in their chaos. You can help without hollowing yourself out. You can love fiercely without disappearing. Jung called this differentiated consciousness, the ability to remain centered while connecting with others. The awakening empath becomes what Jung described as a conscious individual, sensitive, but no longer exploited, compassionate, but no longer erased. Someone who moves through the world with an open heart and unshakable boundaries. And Jung believed something radical, that individual transformation creates collective change. When one person becomes conscious, it gives others permission to do the same. The empath who stops people-pleasing doesn't just change their own life. They model a new way of being for everyone around them. Your courage to set boundaries gives others courage to set theirs. Your refusal to carry emotions that aren't yours shows others they can take responsibility for their own. Your authenticity reminds them they do not have to perform to be loved. Jung wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But that transformation only happens when at least one person is willing to show up authentically." This is what I call the conscious empath's code. 5 principles that keep you sovereign while still deeply connected. First, feel everything, but absorb nothing. Second, give only from overflow, never from depletion. Third, love others without losing yourself. Fourth, help when inspired, not when guilty. And fifth, trust your inner knowing above external pressure. These are not rules, but living guidelines. They are how the empath keeps their sensitivity alive without sacrificing their soul. Jung called it authentic being, and for the awakening empath, it is the final transformation, no longer the world's quiet savior, but a conscious soul who cannot be controlled. Jung understood something most people miss. Society often labels individual consciousness as selfish. But why? Because unconscious people benefit from the self-neglect of others. When empaths begin to prioritize their own needs, the world quickly accuses them of being cold, distant, or uncaring. Yet Jung drew a vital distinction. There is healthy selfishness and unhealthy selfishness. Healthy selfishness means taking responsibility for your own happiness instead of making others responsible for it. It means building boundaries, not walls. It means practicing self-care instead of falling into self-abandonment. The awakening empath realizes that caring for themselves is not a betrayal of others, it is essential. You cannot pour from an empty cup, and most empaths have been running on empty for years. Within Jung's framework of individuation lies what he called the inner marriage, the integration of masculine and feminine principles within a single psyche. For empaths, this becomes a balancing act, blending their natural receptivity with healthy assertiveness, learning to receive as much as they give, developing the power to say no as easily as yes, integrating their nurturing nature with their need for independence. Jung called this psychological wholeness, when you no longer need someone else to complete you because you have learned to complete yourself. And what the empath discovers is revolutionary. They can be both soft and strong, both compassionate and boundaried, both sensitive and sovereign. Jung recognized that highly sensitive people carry extraordinary gifts once they learn to manage their sensitivity consciously. I call this the empath's arsenal, abilities that awaken when sensitivity is channeled instead of suppressed. Intuition sharpens into razor-like clarity when it is no longer clouded by everyone else's emotions. Creativity begins to flow when energy is no longer drained by emotional vampires. And genuine, meaningful relationships take root when you attract people who match your authenticity instead of exploiting your kindness. Jung wrote, "Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart." For the conscious empath, vision becomes a compass, cutting through pretense and revealing the truth beneath. But Jung also warned, individuation is often accompanied by loneliness. For empaths, this loneliness can feel unbearable. They have lived entire lives surrounded by people who needed them, and now, for the first time, they must learn to be alone. Yet Jung drew an important line between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the ache of disconnection from others. Solitude is the joy of connection to yourself. The awakening empath discovers this difference. In solitude, they hear their own thoughts without the constant interference of others' emotions. They uncover their own preferences without the weight of other people's expectations. And perhaps for the very first time, they meet themselves. But Jung's path of individuation does not end in retreat. It leads to a conscious return. The empath re-enters relationships and community, not from compulsion, but from choice. They help when it feels authentic, not when they feel guilty. They engage socially when they genuinely desire connection, not when they fear rejection. They give their gifts to the world not from a desperate need to be needed, but from an overflowing abundance of self. Jung called this conscious participation, to engage with life as your true self, not the mask you once performed. Jung understood something most people overlook: psychological growth is not linear. It doesn't move forward in a straight, predictable line. It unfolds in cycles. The awakening empath discovers this truth firsthand. Just when they believe they have mastered their boundaries, a new challenge appears. Just when they feel complete in their authenticity, an old pattern whispers for their return. Doubt creeps in. Loneliness resurfaces. The temptation to shrink back into the comfort of the old identity becomes almost overwhelming. But Jung called this spiral development. You do not return to the same place. You revisit similar themes, only at deeper levels of awareness. Each cycle teaches you something new. Each doubt forces you to remember your strength. Each boundary you hold makes the next one easier. What looks like repetition is actually evolution. The empath who understands this no longer sees setbacks as failures, but as evidence of growth. Jung also believed individuation brings responsibility. Healing is never just for yourself. When you begin to awaken, the natural desire is to help others awaken too. But the way you serve changes completely. The old empath tried to rescue everyone, often at the cost of their own soul. The conscious empath serves differently. Instead of absorbing pain, they hold space for others to face it. Instead of fixing problems, they trust others to find their own solutions. Instead of running into every storm, they become a lighthouse, steady, bright, offering guidance for those who are ready to see, but never chasing ships that choose the dark. Jung called this authentic service, helping from wholeness rather than woundedness, and this shift is monumental. It is no longer about being needed, it is about being real. At the heart of Jung's work was a vision of the self, not the shallow ego, not the social mask, but the integrated totality of who you are. For empaths, reaching this state means no longer rejecting parts of themselves. It means embracing the paradox within, being both soft and strong, both caring and firm, both deeply sensitive and fiercely sovereign. It means no longer apologizing for feeling too much, or for needing rest, or for protecting your peace. The integrated empath learns that their boundaries are not selfishness, they are self-respect. Their sensitivity is not weakness, it is their greatest strength. Their authenticity is not too much, it is exactly what was missing. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." For the empath, this privilege feels like finally breathing after a lifetime underwater. But Jung also reminded us, wholeness requires courage. The courage to disappoint others in order to remain true to yourself. The courage to be alone rather than betray your values. The courage to choose growth over comfort, again and again. Because becoming whole is not the easy path. It is the only path worth walking. If you recognize yourself in these patterns, if you feel the cycles of awakening pulling you deeper, if you notice your energy returning, your guilt dissolving, your authenticity emerging, then you are already walking the same path. Jung mapped more than a century ago the path of individuation, the path of the sovereign empath. Trust the process, trust your instincts, trust that becoming who you truly are is not only your right, but your responsibility. Because the world does not need more self-abandoned empaths breaking themselves to hold everyone together. The world needs conscious empaths, people who care deeply but wisely, who love fiercely but with boundaries, who no longer confuse sacrifice with service. So if you see yourself in this journey, write this down. My breaking point became my breakthrough, because when an empath stops pleasing everyone and starts seeing the truth, something remarkable happens. They don't become selfish, they become sovereign. They don't lose their compassion, they finally learn to include themselves in it. They don't stop caring about others, they begin caring about themselves too. And that is Jung's lasting gift to every empath who dares to wake up, the knowledge that your sensitivity is not a burden, but a power. That your wholeness is not a dream, but a birthright. And that the moment you choose yourself, you stop being controlled, and you start becoming free. Individuation is not a finish line you cross once. It is a living process, an unfolding that continues for a lifetime. Jung understood that consciousness doesn't expand in a straight line. It grows in spirals. The awakening empath learns this through experience. There will be times when old habits whisper seductively, asking you to return. There will be days when you question your worth, when boundaries feel heavy, when silence feels unbearable. But every return is deeper than the last. Every cycle carries new wisdom. Every boundary held strengthens the foundation of who you are becoming. This is why individuation is not about perfection. It is about presence. The conscious empath understands that the work is never done. Instead, it becomes a way of living, choosing truth over illusion, authenticity over performance, sovereignty over approval. Jung called this spiral development, and he saw it as the very heartbeat of transformation. But there is another layer to this journey that few dare to name. Individuation demands sacrifice, not of yourself, but of the illusions that once defined you. The illusion that your worth is tied to usefulness. The illusion that love must be earned through exhaustion. The illusion that silence is safer than truth. Each of these must die so that the true self can live. Jung called this the night sea journey, and it is as terrifying as it is liberating. The empath who emerges on the other side of that darkness is not naive, nor are they cynical. They are clear. They see manipulation where once they saw obligation. They hear the subtle lies in guilt trips and emotional games. They know the difference between responsibility and control, between compassion and self-erasure, and with that clarity comes freedom. This freedom is not without cost. You may lose relationships that cannot survive the light of your authenticity. You may stand alone in seasons of solitude, wondering if the price is too high. But Jung taught that solitude is not loneliness. Loneliness is the ache of being cut off from others. Solitude is the gift of being deeply connected to yourself. And in that quiet, the empath learns something radical. They were never truly alone. They were simply meeting themselves for the first time. From this place of wholeness, service is reborn. The conscious empath no longer runs themselves ragged trying to save everyone. They become a mirror, a model, a lighthouse. They show others that it is possible to be sensitive without being exploited, compassionate without being consumed. Jung called this authentic service, helping from fullness instead of emptiness, from strength instead of desperation. And then, something extraordinary happens. Individuation ripples outward. The moment one empath chooses themselves, it gives silent permission for others to do the same. Your boundaries inspire courage in those who had none. Your authenticity gives language to those who were voiceless. Your refusal to perform love shows others that they too are worthy without masks. Jung wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." This is the quiet revolution of the conscious empath. So what does it mean to complete this journey? Jung's answer was simple: wholeness. not perfection, not sainthood, but integration. The merging of your sensitivity with your strength, the balance of giving and receiving, the marriage of your inner masculine and feminine, your nurturing and your boundaries, your softness and your fire. You no longer apologize for your depth. You no longer betray yourself to keep others comfortable. You no longer abandon your needs for someone else's approval. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And for the empath, this privilege is hard-won. It is carved from nights of doubt, from the ashes of old identities, from the silence of solitude, from the courage to walk away from those who only loved the mask. But when you arrive, you realize something staggering. Your sensitivity was never the problem. It was your unawareness of its power. Sensitivity is not weakness. It is the sharpest form of intelligence. Boundaries are not selfishness. They are the architecture of self-respect. Authenticity is not too much. It is exactly enough. So if you see yourself in these words, if you feel the pull of this journey, remember this: your breaking point is not the end. It is the beginning of your breakthrough. The moment you stop pleasing everyone, you step into the truth of who you are. And in that truth, you do not become cruel. You become sovereign. You do not lose your compassion. You finally include yourself in it. You do not stop caring about others. You learn to care for yourself too. This is the transformation Jung left as his gift, that the empath's deepest wound can become their greatest source of strength, that the shadow they fear holds the very power they need, and that individuation, this radical act of choosing yourself, is not just a personal victory. It is a collective revolution, because every time an empath chooses themselves, the world loses one more illusion, and the world gains something far more powerful, a conscious soul who cannot be controlled. So remember this: your breaking point is not your destruction, it is your awakening. The moment you stop living for everyone else, you begin living for the first time. You are not here to be the world's sponge. You are not here to carry the weight of wounds that aren't yours. You are here to stand in your truth, to honor your sensitivity, to protect your fire, and to finally, unapologetically, choose yourself. Because when you do, everything changes. The chains fall, the mask dissolves, and the empath the world once underestimated rises, not as a servant, not as a victim, but as a sovereign soul. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are," and that privilege is now yours. Your sensitivity is your strength. Your boundaries are your freedom. Your authenticity is your power. Never forget, you were never too much. You were always exactly enough. And the moment you believe that, you become unstoppable. Maybe this message found you at the exact moment it was meant to. Maybe it's finally time for you to choose yourself. For years, you've placed everyone else's needs above your own. You've carried invisible burdens, fought silent battles, and given more than anyone ever noticed. You've been strong, generous, endlessly understanding, but somewhere along the way, you lost yourself. And now your soul is whispering, "It's my turn." Choosing yourself is not selfishness. Choosing yourself is the purest act of truth, because you cannot pour into others from an empty vessel. You cannot heal the world while abandoning your own heart. Jung once wrote, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart." Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. And right now, you are awakening. Awakening is never easy. Masks fall away. False connections unravel. Some people will walk out of your life, but remember, those who leave were only ever attached to the version of you that served them. The ones who truly see you will stay. Because you are no longer the endlessly giving empath. You are the consciously selective soul who knows their worth. Perhaps for the first time, you will be alone. But this aloneness is not emptiness. It is a gift. In solitude, you will finally hear your own voice, unshaped by the noise of others. You will feel your own needs, your own desires, your own truth. And when you meet yourself fully, you will realize you were never weak. You only left your light buried under the shadows of everyone else's demands. Now it's time to take that light back. When you choose yourself, you'll notice something remarkable. The world does not fall apart. People will still find their way. Life goes on, but you, for the first time, will feel free. You'll no longer burn out for others. You'll no longer silence your voice for peace. You'll no longer sacrifice your soul just to be loved. You will see that you were always both soft and strong, sensitive and powerful, nurturing and unyielding, and all of those parts belong. They make you whole. Maybe these words feel distant, or maybe something deep within you has been waiting for this moment. Because every transformation begins with one small radical question: what if I choose me? And when your answer becomes yes, everything changes. Your relationships shift, your body begins to heal, your spirit rises. You finally stand on your own side. So remember this: your breaking point is not the end. It is your breakthrough. The silence you carried becomes your voice. The weight you bore becomes your strength. The pain you endured becomes your clarity. Maybe this is the moment. Maybe this is your permission. Maybe this is the time to choose yourself, fully, unapologetically, completely. Because you were never too much. You were always exactly enough. And the moment you believe that, you become unstoppable.